What happens when you take an existing game series and completely change its identity to one that most of its fans now perceive to be what the series stands for as a whole? For Need for Speed, doing this resulted in one of the most commercially successful games in the series' history, and in turn transforming its identity. This identity, in the form of tuner culture, customization, and the main theme of underground street racing, was reinforced in being what the series really stands for with the 2015 reboot. After the series had gone through a little bit of an identity crisis, the reboot set the idea that the main core of the series was the one birthed in the underground games 13 years prior. However, for whatever reason, there is very little in-depth discussion of the relationship of these games online, even after almost a decade since 2015's release, other than the simple acknowledgement that they are alike. I find this quite odd, since there are loads of aspects and themes from Underground that have been translated in 2015 that encourages plenty of discussion. So today, I am going to compare 2015 to Underground 2, which I wouldn't be wrong in thinking of it as being superior to its predecessor, to showcase how the Underground formula had evolved over an 11-year time difference. To state that no one has played or enjoyed either game solely for their story would be correct. Underground 2 has a story that consists of a revenge plot, but since it's brought up so rarely that you almost forget that it's there to begin with, and is also not tied to the progression whatsoever, there's no reason for me to mention this further. On the contrary, 2015's story is entirely relevant to the progression structure, as each member of the main cast are tied to what the game counts as street racing's 5 disciplines, with each discipline being tied to a real-life racing icon that each member wants to get noticed by. In order of icon, crew member, and discipline, Magnus Walker and Spike represent speed, Ken Block and Manu for style, Risky Devil and Robin for crew, Akira Nakai and Amy for tune, and Shinichi Morohoshi and Travis for outlaw. This progression structure is conceptually a lot more down-to-earth and realistic than Underground 2's, where illegal street racing is shown to be a glamorous trend in the normal world, rather than it actually being presented as underground culture. To progress throughout the game, you have to select different sponsors to get access to the set races. You are paid by established companies to basically cause terror in the city and drive like a Mong. In 2015, the progression revolves around reputation through its leveling system. Not every race, story mission, or performance part is open to you at the start, but Underground 2's extremely questionable game design doesn't end with its world building. One of the game's most notorious features is the star rating system, where your car needs a specific amount of swag to be noticed by magazine and CD companies, and therefore required to progress throughout the game. Now, this wouldn't have been such a big issue nowadays if the customization wasn't just creating an abomination out of your perfectly fine car. Fortunately, ever since this entry, bizarre requirements like this ceased to exist in future entries, and there is nothing comparable to this in even Most Wanted, let alone 2015. One of Underground 2's greatest highlights and selling points was that it was the first Need for Speed game to feature an open world. Sure, it wasn't the first to do it, but given that this was a direct sequel to the series' most successful game at the time, it sure was an exceptional innovation to the formula. 20 years later, Bayview is considered to be one of the best open worlds in a racing game of all time, both in its form and function. For starters, the map is beautiful in every area you go to, and I believe it's because that, above all, it's presented to be alive. There is a perfect amount of traffic in the game to both fit the description of a bustling city, whilst not being a nuisance in actual gameplay, which is paired with bright lights and vibrant colours in every area you visit. In comparison, Ventura Bay features a main highway, the city, the mountains, and a dock area just like Underground 2. But other than the map layout, since 2015 does very little to make any of these areas seem memorable, it's no wonder why people have very little to say about 2015's map. Its only effort is through vistas, snapshots, and donuts, but the latter examples are laughingly useless in terms of making any area memorable. That also goes without mentioning 2015 City, even with all the promotional materials emphasizing the prominence of the big city. Only a small chunk is actually accessible, and since it is such a dead city, no wonder no one remembers it. Bayview is more than just a pretty face. The open world offers plenty of interactivity through its physical locations, another reason why this map is so highly regarded. If you wanted to apply a specific modification to your car, or to buy a car in the first place, you had to find the shops that offered them, with emphasis on find, as the game does not conveniently present them on the map, and instead drops hints to their location through messages and coloured spotlights. In 2015, in a time where games favour convenience over total immersion, the Player Garage is the one-stop location for everything you'd need to buy. There are other locations you would visit whilst completing the story, but since they have no use outside of being the setting of story cutscenes, they don't really count. The loss of immersion in the newer game is also seen when it comes to interacting with other races in the game world. In both games, you can challenge other drivers to a duel. Underground 2 debuted this feature by allowing racers to attempt to outrun each other, but 2015 further developed this mechanic by allowing players to choose more game modes, like drift challenges and sprint races, as well as refining the outrun mode by setting a set path, which also made sure they wouldn't last forever. The disadvantages of player interactivity in the newer game come from the presentation of the interaction. In Underground 2, there's always a snarky remark made to you via phone, telling you to stay off their turf or something.
Yo dog, I done told you, the time is now, let's deal with this.
Which makes these far more personal than 2015, when there is nothing. The topic of interaction extends to there being actual people in the game world as opposed to just cutscenes, other text messages and loading screens, another factor that makes Ventura feel a lot more lifeless. Although the previously mentioned star rating system is one of Underground 2's biggest flaws, that doesn't argue against the fact that the amount of options Underground 2 offers is still one of the most in-depth offerings in the series' history. In the run-up to 2015's release, one of its key selling points in the game's marketing was the return of body customization, since it had been absent from recent entries at the time.
But how do you make it your own? By delivering the richest customization ever seen in a Need for Speed game. Your ride is built with the hottest authentic aftermarket brands, performance tuning, and personalized car handling.
2015 was the first game in the series that offered parts exclusively from real-life brands such as Sabin Carbon and Rocket Bunny, whereas all of the parts from previous games were entirely fictional. However, since there are only so many brands and incredibly tight licensing restrictions that weren't a problem a decade prior, this meant that there were a lot less parts in general, to the point that some cars have no options whatsoever. Underground 2's innovations in customization didn't end with the cosmetic body parts. Another feature that made a return in 2015 is the ability to tune the handling of the car. This is not a feature unique to Underground, but just like visual cosmetics, boasts the most in-depth iteration in the series. In Underground 2, you were able to adjust RPM ranges, nitrous power duration ratios, front and rear suspension height, and so much more, even allowing tuning for specific event types. Whilst Underground 2's tuning allowed you to adjust several factors, 2015's tuning is limited to only affecting the handling to suit the car into drift or grip, with the accompaniment of a master slider as well as being able to tune individual aspects. The use of handling tuning was required to suit cars into specific game modes, whilst Underground 2's tuning was an entirely optional feature that you may not even have noticed. And with that said, I believe that's everything notable that I can point out. Of course, feel free to mention anything I may have missed in the comments. Until then, thanks for watching.